Hello viewers, welcome to our lecture series on Indian ethos in management, and we are talking about the ethical entropy. We are talking about the whole philosophy of the ethics as far as Indian scriptures are concerned. This is going to be part 2 of our lectures on the topic. And in the previous lecture of mine, I gave you a brief introduction of why there is a sudden hike, sudden increase in the discussion and the research on the topic of business ethics, or what you call as the ethics or the ethical foundations. So the reasons were already explained. So taking our discussion forward, I'll be telling you about the emergence of ethical leadership and the 8 developments which contributed to social entropy in general that we had discussed in the previous lecture of mine. Now I'll be telling you about those 8 social entropies which actually call for the need for a concern for ethics in public life and businesses. Along with the liberalization and globalization, if we talk about that wave which actually forced India to liberalize itself and go towards the path of globalization in 1991. These 8 sins of modernity, they are being called as 8 sins of modernity or negative forces. It have also been liberalized and globalized. So globally we have not only got the global positives, but we have also invited the global negatives. I am not saying that negativity is not in one country. Negativity may be in any country or in any setup, but the kind of the philosophical foundation which we are having into our Indian scriptures, there is less chance of having negative forces into our setup. So with the globalization and liberalization, whatever modernity we have got, there are 8 sins of modernity which are going to be globalized, which are going to be liberalized. So there is a concern for restoring the ethical values in the society to prevent its ethical degeneration and increase in social entropy. So there is a need to restore that there should not be any ethical degeneration or increase in social entropy. The social entropy is basically a result of 3 ECGs, which is being supported by certain researches. I will be acknowledging at the end of this very lecture of mine that this social entropy is a result of 3 ECGs. First is excessive consumption and greed, that we are leading towards a society which is consumption oriented, which is actually going for lots and lots of consumption. Second one is excessive consumerism and greed. There is huge power being given to consumers as well. Consumerism is there, that is not bad, but along with that greed is also there, and excessive competition and greed. If you find in all 3 ECGs, you would find greed and greed is common in all 3 situations, whether it is excessive consumption or it is excessive consumerism or it is excessive competition. So if we look at these 3 components of ECG, we find that E and G is basically distorting this entire idea of C, that is consumption, consumerism and competition. We have no problem with consumption, we have no problem with consumerism, consumers getting more and more rights, we have no problem with competition also. But if it becomes excessive and it is being driven by greed, it actually gives open invitation to lot of problems which is being called as social entropy, which can be called as social entropy, which can be categorized as social entropy. Because in your way of consumption, consumerism and competition, you are actually being very excessive in terms of usage, and you are driven by a factor which is called greed. So we are witnessing the emergence of the ECG generation, widening the ideal real gap. So the reason for this ideal versus real gap is basically these 3 ECGs to a larger extent you would find. Now if we look at the paradigm of ethics, there are different terms which comes to our discussion. One is deontological, teleological, praxis and the virtue theorist. So different types of theorists are there, different propagators are there who have different ways of defining ethics, defining different paradigms of ethics. Traditionally, there have been two broad paradigms, or what you call as conceptual lenses, for theoretical study of ethics. One was deontological and the second one was teleological. So, initially these two lenses were there to read, to study, to interpret the different paradigms of what you call as ethics. So, we have to understand that they have also been referred to as theories of ethics and schools of thought. We were referring them to theories of ethics and schools of thought. The deontological approach is rooted in the concept of duty. If we define the term deontological, at times my learners ask me, sir, can you please define what is deontological? I am going to define it here. It is rooted in the concept of duty, and this approach is derived from the Greek word deontos. Deontos is a Greek word which refers to duty and obligations. So, when I say deontological, I am referring to your duties and obligations. So, this way of this paradigm of ethics is going to remind us about our duties and obligations, that see, this is my duty, this is my obligation, this is my responsibility to ensure while performing my routine activities. So, here the focus is on the duties and obligations rather than consequences of action. But the problem is that in deontological approach itself, when we study it, we are not looking at duties and obligations at times, and we start looking at the consequences of the action. And here we are reminded of the famous Gita shloka Karmanyeva adhikarasti ma phalesu kadachana, which says that we have right only to do our duties and not to be concerned about the fruits of our action. If my duties and if I perform my duties with a sense of responsibility, there is nothing which can stop me from getting the fruits of that. There is nothing which can stop me from getting the result of that. But we should not look at the consequences of action before performing any duties. Of course, we should not. So, this is there into our philosophy, and if we believe into the Indian scriptures, we should behave in that manner only. So, deontological approach itself talks about the sense of duty and obligations, and it is not new to India. It is already there into Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which says that we have only a right to perform our duties, we should not look at the result. The major conceptual theoretical ideas in the deontological school, they come from, there is a research by Kant's idea of categorical imperative, which is a command that is categorical, that is command which is categorical, there are no exceptions to that. When I say categorical imperatives, they are like commandments, they are like orders which must be followed without exception. So, there is no exception to it, whatever is being said you have to implement that. It is like commandment, there is no if and but, whatever is being said, whatever is being instructed, you have to implement. So, categorical imperatives, they are basically, it would not be wrong to say that they are basically commandments. And if we look at the researches by Kant, it characterizes the moral rules as imperatives that express what we ought to do categorically rather than hypothetically. There is a, this statement is given by Boatwright in his study, and it is written on page number 55 of their research. So, Kantian ethics constitute the foundation of the deontological school. If we look at the entire deontological school, the foundation is there into that very idea. But when we apply it to organizational context, to the context of a corporate entity, what an organization should do, what a company should do, they need to identify their categorical imperatives to resolve the ethical dilemmas which they are witnessing, which they are facing. So, at times you are having certain ethical dilemmas which you are facing. So, how to deal, how to resolve those ethical dilemmas, that need to be identified. So, they need to identify the categorical imperatives, and in sharp contrast to the deontological school, there is another approach called teleological school, which is primarily concerned with the consequences of actions. So, first one is concerned with duty and obligation, second is talking about your consequences of actions. Greatest good of greatest number, it defines its ethical principle. So, greatest good of greatest number, it is going to define their ethical principle. And here I would say that if we talk about the propagators of utilitarianism, they belong to the teleological school of ethics. It is the utilitarianism which belongs to this very idea, this very school of ethics, which is being called as teleological school of ethics. And if we look at the entire philosophy of utilitarianism, it is based on the idea of maximum good of maximum number. It ignores the interest of those who are out of the pale of this maxim. So, they basically look at the interest of maximum good of maximum number. In fact, it is precisely these left out persons, the people who are left out from this entire discourse, who may be the most needy one, the people who bear the consequences of the actions leading to the maximum good of maximum number. You are doing maximum good of maximum number, but what about those marginalized people? Because they are the one who are going to bear the consequences of your actions. You are doing a business, and there is one segment of society which is actually which is inhaling the entire smoke which you have created. I can give you an example like this, that whatever profits you are creating for your stakeholders, for the people who have contributed capital to your company. But what about that person in the society who has nothing to do with your business, who is living besides or behind the boundaries of your company, and is indirectly or without any reason inhaling all the smoke, all the pollution which you have created? What about that person who is left out? Because that person, that segment of society is not into our list. So, we need to understand, my dear learners, the environmentalists, they have observed that it is the poor people who bear the brunt of environmental damage, though they are not a creator of the damage. They are not at all concerned with the creation of this damage, but they are basically the one who is going to face that damage in the front row. I am not saying that others are not going to bear the brunt of this environmental damage, but in the front row who all are standing for no rhymes and reason. So, in place of doing the cost benefit analysis, why don't we conduct benefit burden analysis? Why don't we change our perspective as a business enterprise? So, instead of cost benefit analysis, which most of the propagators of utilitarianism or you call as advocates of this utility oriented approach, it is more useful to conduct benefit burden analysis, because there you can find the impact of actions on the last few people, impact of your actions, what you are going to create, what you are going to cause on people who are among the last few. And again, this idea is not new. Gandhi ji could very well understand this benefit burden analysis. So, without giving any a long theory or model for implementing this, Gandhi ji simply advocated this perspective through his talisman, which is called as look at the poorest of the poor and see how your decisions are going to affect him. So, before implementing your decision, it was basically being said by Mahatma Gandhi that you have to look at the poorest of the poor people, that in what manner this decision is going to affect them. If it is positive, then of course your decision is right, otherwise it is wrong. So, somehow the corporate entities, while conducting their cost benefit analysis, they forget to conduct benefit burden analysis. If they start their if they start their analysis with this perspective, that in place of cost benefit I will start with benefit burden analysis, the problem is not going to get intensified. So, this is actually in sharp contrast to what the advocates of this utility oriented researchers are saying. There is another view which is non-utilitarian. It comes from the idea of happiness for all and not merely maximum good of maximum number. We have to understand that these utilitarian people, they only talk about maximum good of maximum number. that we are working for majority of the people, but what about those who are the marginalized one, who are not at who are not good in numbers, who are not there into your list. So, the idea of happiness for all, it is again a long standing belief into Indian philosophy. We talk about Sarvajan Hitaya Sarvajan Sukhay instead of Bahujan Hitaya and Bahujan Sukhay. We have been believing into the happiness of all, happiness for all, and we all understand Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. So, this idea has also been expressed in the famous shloka, and it says that let there be happiness for all. Why not for all? Why not maximum good for maximum number? Why not all good for all numbers? Why not? Why don't we say that the happiness is the right of each and every one, each and every person? So, the survival of all is the ethical principle of existence, in contrast to what the people, the advocates of utilitarianism, which ignores this ethical concept. And if we view it in terms of the present discussion, environmentalists, they could also consider the entire discourse of utilitarianism inherently anti-environment. They find that yes, they are anti-environment. So, my dear learners, somehow we have to have this kind of discussion, this kind of healthy discussions on the topic, that why don't we talk about survival of all in place of talking about survival of the fittest or survival of the best. Why don't we try to make everyone best, make everyone capable of surviving. So, survival is not the right of few people, survival is the right of one and all who is there on this planet or on this earth. So, in addition to these two paradigms, which is deontological and teleological, which are slightly, which are actually different, two different poles, there is another perspective which has emerged from the conceptual and empirical work of different researchers, and I would name some of them. There is a name of Sorab Sadri and his associates Dastur and Jayashri. They have contributed significantly to this entire discussion on the paradigms of different paradigms of ethics, and they have given a new perspective which has emerged from conceptual and empirical work of theirs. They call their school of thought as praxis school, wherein the word praxis have borrowed from Marxist literature. They are saying that we believe into the praxis school, and I would relate it to the ancient Indian idea. Somehow they must have gone through those ideas, those shlokas from Bhagavad Gita, and that is why they are writing like this. They have given a concept of happiness for all. So, we believe into Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, and if we believe, if we look at their praxis school, they have suggested a kind of need for acceptance in the corporate world. Their study is confined to corporate entities only, and its formulation was entirely based on the managerial responses from Indian industry and is born out of the empirical data at hand. So, they have taken the help of empirical data, and then they are suggesting. This entire discussion on character competence of the corporation is basically based on a research paper published by Subhash Sharma in Journal of Human Values, Management Center for Human Values, published by IIM Calcutta, and it was published long back, 22 years back, in July-December issue of 2002. So, it is my duty to acknowledge to the author, to the contributor of this entire idea, who has actually compiled beautifully the different facets of Indian ethos in management. So, according to this school, if the decision maker can discuss his or her decision openly and freely within his or her peer group, then the decision is of course deemed to be an ethical one. And this has been discussed at length previously also by me on different occasions. But we have to understand that whatever decision I am taking, whether all my peer group members, they agree with that or not. If there is an agreement, then of course it must be right. There can be one or two outliers, there can be one or two exceptions. Barring that, if all others agree, then of course that decision is going to be the ethical one. So, we have to understand, my dear learners, that the world is beyond the dichotomy of black and white. and it is full of grey and grey of different shades. Even the grey has different shades. You cannot say that the dichotomy of black and white is the ultimate truth. We have to understand that the world is full of grey and grey of different shades. This color grey is a reflective of is an indicative of the different dimensions which we cannot deny. So, the praxis theory of ethics is most suitable to resolve ethical dilemmas falling in the grey area. This is what the propagator of this entire idea says. They say that most of the time managers are dealing with grey areas, and herein lies the usefulness of this very approach which they are proposing. Some of us may argue that praxis school essentially refers to the norm setting in the grey areas, that you have to set a benchmark in those grey areas. Within the praxis school there is a variation in views also. If you look at the researchers, some of the researchers, their findings I am quoting, Sadri claims that praxis arises out of false consciousness, which is one of the sins which I have indicated when I was telling you about the 8 sense of globalizations which we are finding in terms of ethical behavior, in terms of ethical conditions, that they are actually opposed to the entire philosophy of ethical foundations. False consciousness and the need to belong, whereas Jayashri claims that this leads to curb on creativity and innovation. So, what is the result of it? If we start thinking like this, if we actually somehow we are not able to come out of those 8 sins, what will happen? The meritocracy will go out and the mediocrity will come in to the business paradigm. And this I am not the only person who is saying that. All researchers, they are accepting that if we follow this way of false consciousness and the need to belong, then of course what is the outcome of it? Meritocracy is going to die, it will go out, and mediocrity will come in. And with mediocrity you can only remain as an organization which is living into mediocrity. You cannot talk about the meritocracy, you cannot talk about reaching at the top. So, there are 3 distinct approaches in the literature of ethics, and we can call them to be deontological, teleological and praxis. So, one more addition is there. And in the literature we can also find the virtue theorists who advocate virtue theory rooted in Aristotle's idea of virtue. And if we believe the Aristotle, he says that the value to be developed are best learned by studying the lives of people who are at the top of their performance, heroic persons. So, Aristotle says that if you really want your coming generation or your present generation to learn the values or develop the values, then the best way is to ask them to study the lives of heroic persons. Societies where such virtues are honesty, fidelity, humanity and generosity, they are the norm point to great individuals as models that provide the guidance for individual and moral action. So, their life itself is an example. You can simply read their entire life. So, the story of a heroic person is going to guide you towards can become a guiding light to the path of your ethical values. Aristotle thinks that all the virtues are communicated this way only. So, if you are confused about honesty, you have to understand. Look at the stories of honest behavior in spite of consequences as related in the sagas and epic poetry. This is what is being endorsed by a researcher called Baham in 1996. That don't look at consequences, you have to look at the stories of honest behavior. We all know there are a number of stories. If you look at the Indian scripture, we find the Ramcharitmanas, we find the story of Lord Rama, Maryada Purushottam. The kind of behavior he has exhibited is basically the ideal human being, of ideal human being. So, the continuing popularity and relevance of Ramayana and Mahabharata in India, it actually points out to the deep influence of virtue theory on common masses. So, we all believe into the virtue theory and it is easily accepted also. It is somehow there into our genes, and we all understand that there is a deep influence of virtue theory on us. So in a way you can say that virtue theory is a trans-temporal and is independent of the ideology. If you talk about the virtue theory, it is independent of not only the ideology but also technology, production system and forms of business organization or the business format which you are witnessing, which you are following. So virtue theory is to my mind, I would say it is giving us, showing us the essence of Indian ethics. It is independent of the time, it is independent of the type of business format, it is independent of the setup in which you are going to implement, whether you implement it in the business organization or into your own life or into at the level of your nation. So there is a pioneering work of S.K. Chakravarti which can be classified in the category of virtue theory rooted in Vedantic ethics. Another scholar called Matthias also belongs to the virtue theory category, and even the idea of spirituality at workplace in the land of the dollar god. There is a study, popular study by Srinivas in 1998. It could be considered as belonging to virtue theory approach to ethics and ethical leadership. So my dear learners, why I am citing these studies? Just to give you an indication, just to give you a hint that you can refer to these studies in detail, because we cannot discuss all studies here due to the paucity of time. So I am simply indicating you that these studies can be of immense help for you if you want to develop a better understanding on the topic. You need to go through these studies where you can find what these authors, what these contributors have to say about their approach to ethics and ethical leadership. So in contrast to all these, if we find there is a different idea also given by Sadri, which suggests that a literature on the relevance of Indian ethics to management, it can be classified in three paradigms, and it says that it is soul based, mind based, soul based thought, mind based thought, and ideal real dualistic thought. So it says that either you go for soul based thought or you go for mind based thought and ideal real dualistic thought. This is a kind of classification these researchers have given. It is only their way of interpreting, but all three exist. You have soul based thought, you have mind based thought, you have ideal real dualistic thought, which is nothing but mansa vacha karmana. So whatever you think, whether you speak that or not, and whatever you speak, whether you implement that or not. There is a study by Boatwright which observes that despite their differences, utilitarian and Kantian ethics both address the question what actions are right. There is a midline also, that despite all differences, both of the ideas, they are actually giving the answer to a question what actions are right. Virtue ethics ask instead what kind of person should we be. So virtue ethics is going to present before us an ideal idea of what we are supposed to be. Virtuousness and virtuosity is at the heart of this entire virtue theory. But the problem or the difficulty comes in practicing the virtuosity, cause it is very demanding. It demands a very high level of virtuousness on the part of individuals. So I can preach virtuosity, but can I implement that in true spirit? Of course, we can implement it with more and more practice and with more and more commitment. So it amounts to moralizing, and contradictions can be observed even in the lives of those who advocate extreme form of virtue theory, but we don't deny to that. But here we have to understand, my dear learners, that virtue theory is a kind of ideal. So if we try to actuate, if we try to reach to that level, in that process, in that on our way to reaching to that virtuosity, we would eliminate all those sins which are there, which has come to us on account of liberalization and globalization. It may even amount to religious or secular fundamentalism. So a practical formula which incorporates ideas from the various theoretical sources, it can also be summed up as JRD, that is called J stands for justice, R stands for right, and D stands for duties. So there are number of ideas which are there, and my duty here was to tell you about the deontological, teleological and virtuous theory of virtuosity. And with this, I am concluding this very lecture of mine. I hope you must have enjoyed this part of my lecture on the topic. Thank you so much.